Welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar. This is about all things fractional executive, how to use fractional executives in your own company. I suspect a number of you who are on this webinar own your own companies, serve on the board, or investors in companies. And we probably will also be joined by a number of executives who are interims and also define themselves as fractional. And so I'm going to dive right in here. So you're in the right place if you've got ambitions for your company. You're seeking more growth. You understand the power of having a great team around you, and you are somebody who takes action. As we were developing this presentation, I was thinking, I think this is probably a parallel sort of thing. If you have big ambitions for your company, you probably also should think about having people around you who have big ambitions. And if you are somebody who take action, who has a predilection for taking action, want to surround yourself with people who also take action. And that's a key point, the differentiator for folks who are described as interim, leaders described as interim or fractional. So let's keep diving in here. Our agenda, we're going to talk about what a fractional executive is. We're talking about when it makes sense to use a fractional executive and how to determine the right person for your team. Also, if I can toss out here at this point, there is a chat box, on your screen, and I'd encourage everybody, if you have a question or a comment you'd like to make, please put it in the chat. My only disclaimer is that while I'm talking, I may not necessarily see what's on the chat. And so it could be that my colleague Olivia Wagner will be raising her hand at some point. But this is meant to be interactive, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, question, whatever comes up. Okay, so that's our agenda. First, a little bit of background. My name is Bob Jordan. I'm a Chicago guy. I'm here in Chicago, ensconced in my office in River North. I've been at this in terms of having been an interim and then launching InterimExecs, but it's 25 years helping owners of companies both grow. And I had a particular expertise when I was doing interim gigs, which was to help owners and teams get to the exit. So I've been in 3 IPOs and was the lead guy selling 2 strategics in a number of cases. That's just one particular kind of use case. And as we've discovered over the years, InterimExecs has been approached by 8,000 executives over the past decade, tons of expertise across a vast continuum. And I found a particular expertise for myself in being a rainmaker that I was far better at that than in being the operating executive. My formative years, I started my first company. It was called Online Access. It put me on the Inc. 500 list, fastest growing businesses. I'm the co-founder of InterimExecs and CEO, founded this along with Olivia Wagner. And InterimExecs is a matchmaker. We match owners around the world with the right leadership, whether that is something in a state of turnaround or growth. I do have kind of a love affair with learning about leadership, which fueled doing some books. Wrote a book on champion company founders called How They Did It about a decade ago. And that was rigorous criteria for founders to get into that book. They had to launch, grow, sell for 100 million or more, or go public at 300 million or more. So good learnings from that. So I'd like to give you all some context for why this call or hopefully how this can help you. And in your heart of hearts, you don't have to say it to anybody else, but it is the thing that keeps you up at night. It is your biggest concern. When I was in the process of launching and growing my first company, Online Access, the first realization was it was lonely. I had shareholders, I had employees, I had fellow managers I came to really trust, but I was the guy that had to meet payroll, and that was a lonely thing in the beginning. And then even as it was growing, there was always this question about, what am I missing? What could lead to more exponential growth? And at the time, there was no resource like fractional interim executives. And so a lot of things became harder because the only thing that was really in the market was hiring more people permanently. And that wasn't necessarily the greatest solution. So what is this thing now that exists in the world, this leadership on demand? By the way, if you're joining from the US, we are the last adopter. Everyone thinks US, we're always the first. We're the last at it. Interim and fractional has been in Europe for 50 years. Interesting, when it started in Europe, there was a very big government use case. It's very different in the US now than it is in Europe. But the state of this has become its own career calling. And so there are now thousands of executives where this is what they do as career. They're not between jobs. They're not out seeking a permanent role. They love doing project-based roles, whether you want to call it interim or fractional. Now, today we're going to focus here on fractional, which is meant to be defined as part-time. This is a bit of an intersection with this vast field called management consulting, now about 100 years old, and of course the overlap with the broader gig economy, and this movement in the world of outsourcing and executive search. The only reason we throw executive search in here is because we'll tell you a little bit further along about what InterimExecs is and what we do, but it is a different kind of process and function from traditional headhunting, traditional executive search. So what is a fractional executive? This is somebody who is specialized in their role in the C-suite. For our purposes, we're only talking about C-suite use here as CEOs, CFOs, CIOs. Now, over the years, we have surveyed thousands of interim executives, and the definition here is that if you talk to an interim executive, whether you want to use the word interim, fractional, project, contract, if that executive does 2 or more gigs at a time, that's a fractional exec. Most executives doing this kind of project work still call themselves interim, which is fine. Fractional here is meant to talk about what is part-time. Now, executives who excel at this kind of work must necessarily have pretty strong repeat track record of success. Because if you think about this, if you don't have this, this is a very hard career to sustain. In the world of permanent employment, there's a phrase one of the founders used when we wrote how they did it. He was talking about larger corporations. He said, well, you can hide. And what he meant was that he had been in a big pharma company, and when he went and did his own thing and he had dozens of people, then 50 people, then 100, was not a lot of room for anyone to hide if they were not, in fact, performing well or being held to account. Very hard to sustain this as a career if you cannot demonstrate a track record of repeat success. You have to have a focus to your career in terms of building, growing, transforming. We're going to talk a little about leadership style in the end, but these are leaders who are driven to take on new challenges. Final point, we demand an owner mindset. Now, this is particular to us. I don't know how others function in this market, but we've been at it a long time and developed a concept we call RED Team. Tell you a little bit more about that later, but there are 7 key rules to this particular kind of tribe, and they could all be summed up in a way with owner mindset. So when does fractional leadership make sense? Let's talk about a couple different use cases. The first one is you just don't need the full-time person in the role. Not yet, okay? This is a little hard for a lot of business people, we all think we're, staying on top of it, and you hear about AI, and of course, in business, I think there's more of a tendency, which is you have the people you have the team you have, and that's just the way that it is. And there are points where people leave or they get fired or you make additions. The world is a lot more mobile, or if you're the owner or someone on a board or an investor, the way I would put it is to say, you have more tools in your toolbox now than you ever had before. If you want a little metaphor that no one gets offended at, you're watching a baseball game and the pitcher is doing okay, not doing so well, whatever. The manager walks out onto the mound. Everybody knows what happens. Pitcher hands him the ball. New pitcher comes in. Relief pitcher comes in. That's the way it is. That doesn't mean that the pitcher was fired. Doesn't mean he isn't going to have a great day in a couple days, but that's it. Well, the nature of business is such that, there are stages and cycles and things that happen for all of us. And there is now more possibility than ever before to put somebody into the game. And it doesn't mean that you fire the old person. It doesn't mean that the new person's with you forever. You can just have a possibility of being more powerful, getting more things done. I will also add, for those interim and fractional executives who are on this call, a lot of us, and I'm putting myself in this role because I was an interim before we launched InterimExecs, there can be a mindset and a mentality, which is you're that lone ranger. And, when you're not on a gig, you're sitting in your home office and you're alone. There is power in team. There is strength in team. And my mentor, when I was getting into this, told me early on, I would be more powerful when I was bringing in more resources, even as the interim, the fractional person. And it has been one of the guiding points of ethos for what we do with Red Team. Is we said we're a collective and we're stronger together. And I can tell you some very practical ways in which that has played out. As you can imagine, that being a collective, you just have more resources that are available. So second use case, you need very specialized leadership for a project or some kind of initiative. Now, everybody knows about this when you hear about a business that has gone into some kind of decline or disaster. The number one example, I think, in the world over the past year and a half is FTX. Huge blow up, played out in the courts. And what happened on day 1 or 2 of the crisis becoming known was that an interim CEO came in. Well, in the same sense, fractional executives can come in project-based. One of the huge use cases for owners of companies is preparing for exit. So we're now in the midst of the greatest transfer of wealth in American history, right? The baby boomers, the largest cohort ever, is at least the leading edge is in retirement. So a lot of assets and a lot of businesses are passing along. They may pass to a next generation of family. They may pass to a generation of younger managers. They may be bought by private equity. There are a lot of these businesses. And so you will see all kinds of use cases for fractional executives going in on behalf of an owner, hopefully in advance of the exit, to prepare. So, private equity, for example, is becoming very prevalent around the world. Private equity is completely driven by earnings. You want to know what your business is worth? Well, they're going to ask you what your earnings, your EBITDA is. And you show me the owner that's not trying to double or triple their EBITDA before they formally go to market, hopefully with an investment banker. But so there are all these use cases and all these resources around the owner. You want your wealth manager, you want your investment banker, you're going to want interim executives or fractional executives who are joining you in that to make for the best possible outcome. So lots of use cases. I'll tell you about one of our clients, a company in our portfolio. It's a company in Europe called Charm Solutions, and they're brilliant techies. They're into predictive analytics in the financial market. They wanted to launch in the US market, had no presence, no footprint, no incorporation, no nothing. Well, we happen to have a wonderful fractional CEO who, in different kinds of financial markets, he had already hit 2 home runs. He had already gone 0 to 100 million twice. And that person proved to be an incredible resource for, an affordable fractional way for the European company to enter the US market. There's a great use case around not knowing what you don't know. And it is a good reason to bring somebody in. I'm going to give you my personal example in a way of how I really got jazzed to get into this. Before we formed InterimExecs, I was doing gigs. I was always early stage tech. I get a call from private equity fund, and they had a portfolio company, and the head of the private equity fund was in turmoil because the company was stagnant and he had it. And after years with the same CEO, he knew he had to fire the person. And the management team was going to be very upset and sad to lose someone they knew. He had no replacement, and he also had no idea why it had gone stagnant. It wasn't losing money. It was, well, this wasn't for me. This was not my expertise. But talking with the private equity guy said, I know this organizational consultant, and he goes into family-run businesses, and he kind of is the head of HR when he goes in. But he'd be wonderful because you're going to have this crisis, and you need someone to do triage. The more we were brainstorming on it, I thought, maybe it would be good if you had a fractional or an interim CEO in the room as well. Who knows? So they went in, and it was a marvelous thing, and it was necessary because they did let go of the guy, and they needed someone to come in immediately. And so these 2 executives, they did the triage, got the team on track for the coming year, got the plan in place. Private equity guy said, let's have that CEO, that fractional person, in for just a week. Just you want to see what happens. And on day 4, talking to that executive, I said, what's the outcome? He said, well, we've already uncovered $1 million. Nobody was kind of watching. So that stagnation was already getting solved, but no one on the inside could see it. Next use case. So you're looking for low cost, low risk, and flexibility. And this is where the modern world excels for all of us. I'm including us because our core team at InterimExecs, we make use of fractional resources all the time. The beauty of the way the world is now organized is that you can have great leadership. You are not creating an employer-employee relationship. I'm describing how we do this. There are no benefits. There's no severance. There's no long-term contract. There is a focus on results. You can scale up or down as needed. That is in conjunction with the executive. Oh, before we go off of this, I'll throw out another example. I've been quoted exactly once in the Wall Street Journal. It was earlier this year because they wanted a story about fractional executives. And so they quoted me. We introduced them to one of our clients, a wonderful wealth management firm called Keating and Associates, one of the fastest growing wealth managers in the US, offices around the US. Well, they had an issue, which is that the business had started as a family business before it became a lot bigger, and they had a legacy CFO, and this person was ready to retire, and the systems were completely beyond, in terms of the complexity that was coming into place versus when they were a small, more family kind of office. They didn't need a full-time CFO, even though they were growing fast. And so one of our fractional CFOs went in, also quoted. We were all quoted in the story. Everyone's still happy. Everyone is still doing it. And it probably will run for a number of years. Fractional roles can run long-term. There is the classic case here. This fifth use case is you seek to fill an executive seat fast. There's just a really identifiable gap on your team, and this is the beauty of the fractional resources. You can bring someone in quickly. How quickly? I mean, in our case, literally, it can be within a matter of a day or two. There could be reasons why you need to stabilize your team, and so someone is vitally necessary now. There are reasons for keeping forward momentum. The one thing I'm going to caution you, if anybody listening in is with a public company, don't use Sarbanes-Oxley as your only reason to keep a warm seat. This is the knee-jerk reaction still among public companies, which is if the CEO or CFO seat is vacated for whatever reason, someone dies, fired, whatever, they look around. The usual thing is looking around the boardroom, and they're going to pick somebody, and it is not because that person is going to be moving the business forward. It is for the sake of simply having to do what needs to be done for public filings. We can all do better than that. You absolutely can advance your business more with expert resources. So I'm going to just go back to kind of my own example from company number one, Online Access. I learned from that experience, a trusted team was key around me. There were some resources I couldn't get. And I have to say, it kind of fueled the rest of my career, because when this came around, we were able to form an organization that could do exactly what what we thought needed to be done. So we formed an organization called InterimExecs, and the past decade, 8,000 executives have showed up. We developed a designation we call RED Team, which was RED stands for Rapid Executive Deployment, in terms of looking at just the top 1 or 2% of executives who we were getting to know, where we were developing high confidence that if we were the owner of that company or on the board or an investor, we would feel very confident putting somebody into that role. And so that's the capability which now exists. I'll give you one other overlay, which is that having been at this many years, we started to develop something we called leadership style. That was in addition to role like CEO, CFO, CIO, was in addition to industry, was in addition to level of experience, that we called style, which referred to a person's process and approach and system. Meaning that we have seen where style does exist among highly successful executives. We call that fixer, artist, builder, and strategist, FABS, FABS for short. So it's another overlay in terms of how we look at fractional and interim executives, and it may be something to think about in terms of fueling for your own leadership needs. We absolutely believe it can help in terms of finding the right resource at the right time. So I'm going to throw it back on you, and this is in your heart of hearts. It's nothing you have to put out publicly to us or anyone else, but you think about your biggest challenge, and if it had a potential for being solved immediately. I'm not talking about what is still time consuming and money consuming in terms of traditional hiring, but what could you accomplish with an on-demand leadership resource? So thank you very much for joining us. Want to be very efficient with everyone's time. I would like to make an offer here that if you have a challenge, you have a situation, you want to brainstorm with us for a bit, my email is here. It's bob@interimexecs.com, and I look forward to speaking with you. Do have a moment if anyone wants to throw out into chat. I do see a question here, size of company for fractional. Fractional now is open to everyone. We helped an early stage pharmaceutical company called Virion when they had no revenue. But because they had professional investors, they absolutely had to prepare good financial reports, on-time statements. And so we deployed a fractional CFO in, and that was at a no revenue point. So I don't know that there's a lower limit for fractional. I think anybody can do it. Okay. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to hearing from you.